Hello, this is Walter, and again we're going to be talking about bicycles. And the question that not Veg Peddler, but Veg Peddler brought up. Um, I pronounced his handle on the forum wrong. I kind of saw it as Peg, Veg Peddler, though it's probably because I had a little brain fart because I kind of, before my wife got really ill, she used to listen to a lot of music, and I would, like in the shower or driving down the road, I'd change the lyrics, the words to the songs a lot of times just to make her laugh. And I like to mess around with words sometimes and the names of products or sometimes even people's names, just having a little bit of fun. So it's Veg Peddler, like vegetarian, a bicycling vegetarian. Cool. Okay. Now, we're talking. The question he had brought up actually was concerning pedaling up a hill. Now, I had the impression that he was talking about maybe sprinting up a hill and how a bike can go back and forth, which we talked about in the last video. But I learned a little more information from him that he's actually asking about a slow grind up a hill, pedaling up a hill for a long climb, and not really trying to sprint up the hill. Now, in this case, things really still apply pretty much the same way because you're trying to keep your bike from flipping back and forth because it wastes energy, even though you're not sprinting. And you'll find yourself, if you're a cyclist, you'll find the same thing, not only going up a long climb up a hill, but also if you hit a strong headwind and you've got to pedal a distance into that headwind, it has the same effect. It's going to slow you down. You're going to have to kind of get into that grinding mode of pedaling into the headwind or pedaling up a hill. First off, I would use those exercises that we mentioned in the last video. I'd give them a try. Give them a good try for a couple months and see how they affect your cycling. And that was the suitcase deadlift and the suitcase farmer's walk and a combination of them. Think about it this way. If I go to push somebody and as I apply force, if I apply more force with one hand, it's going to cause their body to go like this. It's going to turn them sideways. Like if I have my right hand on their left side and I press and I'm going like this, that's what's going to happen to their body. Their body's going to go like this. Now, on the other hand, if I use equal pressure and push them, they'll go straight back. Now, the other thought is when I go to push a person, if they themselves tip their body as I'm pressing them, it's going to make it more difficult for me to press them because, well, their body is pivoting out of the way. So, what does that have to do with the bicycle and handlebars? Well, when you start pedaling hard, it's very similar. If your hands are too loose, you're going to allow the bike to flop all over the place. And you're going to be putting unequal pressure on the handlebars, which will cause the bike to lean back and forth and start doing this going down the road more and more. The other thing is to think about a bicycle. It can lean, but also the handlebars are attached to a stem, which is attached to the fork, and it pivots right there. So again, if you've got too much pressure on one side or the other, that's going to flop back and forth. So you've got this interaction going on between your body and the frame or chassis, we might say, of the bicycle. Now, interestingly enough, some motorcycle manufacturers will use the engine as a brace or a part of the actual frame or chassis of the motorcycle. So it creates a certain amount of rigidity is what we want, because then we can apply power. If you think about it this way, if you squat down and you jump really hard and you're on a firm surface, you're going to shoot up to your maximum height if you give your maximum amount of ability that you can and apply it to jumping. But if you're in like deep, loose sand, try the same thing and see what happens. You're not going to jump anywhere near as high. Why is that? Because you had a energy leakage. You lost power into the ground as you pushed your legs. The ground gave way underneath you, so part of the energy was absorbed by that shifting sand. Well, the same thing is if your handlebars are too loose and you're too weak in your upper body and you can't keep things connected and strong enough as you're cranking up a hill or into a headwind and you're kind of like, getting fatigued or loose or whatever, or don't have the strength to begin with, then what happens is some of your energy is being dissipated or absorbed by those loose joints and that loose bicycle frame. So you want to be able to firm things up to apply your power most effectively to the pedals and be able to move straight ahead. And that's one aspect of it, and that's where doing those two exercises mentioned in the last video can actually help you get more strength in your body and your midsection and keep everything squared up and moving ahead well. Now, something else to recall, or something else that applies to this, is a point that Spider Legs brought up, and I knew this myself. Veg Peddler probably knows about this too, but others might not, so it's a really good tip to keep in mind. So let me show you something. Okay, so what I got here is a crank off a BMX bicycle that I've been playing around with and repurposing some of the parts for other things. But in looking at a bicycle and that aspect of pedaling the bike, the thing is when your foot's on top, and this is being my right foot, when it's up here and if you press down, it's just pushing down and the pedal isn't going to go anywhere. If it's leaning back and I push on it, it's going to want to go backwards. And of course, if it's leaning forward a few degrees and I push on it or press on it, it's going to go forward. But if you look at it, when I press on it and it goes forward, it gets to this point and then it like stops because of the angle of your foot. This makes it like it's vertical and it's pushing into here and it isn't going anywhere. So as most people are pushing, they're just kind of pedaling like that, and as this foot pushes the pedal down, this comes up and the other foot kind of just rides on it, and then it gets up here and they push down again, and then it comes around and they push down again, and it comes around and they push down on it. Well, we want to think of that aspect of what Spider Legs brought out in this sense, is that it makes your pedaling more effective and more efficient, and that's scraping like mud off your foot. So if the pedal's here, normally if you press on it, it's going to want to go backward. But the interesting thing is if you kind of scrape your foot on it, what happens is because the pedal pivots and you scrape here, the pedal dips a little bit, and now that scraping action forces the pedal forward. So maybe normally with the pedal here, and I start pressing on this pedal, as the pedal comes around and it drops down to here, you don't have 180 degrees, you probably have something like maybe 130 degrees of actual pedaling power. Some people maybe even less, because they might not start pressing on the pedal until it's more like in this area to this area, and then they're getting like 90 degrees of pedal effort into every 360 degrees of crank stroke. So if the pedal's around here and I can kind of scrape on it, and immediately you can tell as I push my hand on this, it pushes the pedal forward. And then since my foot doesn't slide off the pedal because of the pegs, or maybe you've got toe clips or clip-in shoes or whatever the case may be, it forces the pedal around, so I'm applying power to the pedal in a longer stroke, and as the pedal comes down and around, I scrape my foot back and this pulls the pedal back further. So rather than the end of my power stroke ending here, if I scrape the mud off my shoe, it drags the pedal back into this position. So now I'm able to apply power with one foot from a little bit before, top dead center. It'll start applying power all the way around to about here, where the foot would actually probably try to really slide off. So now I've increased this pedal stroke over 180 degrees. I don't know how many degrees it is. I didn't stop to measure it. But then that makes, if you do that with both feet, and you think about that, pedaling in a circle, scraping the mud off your feet, rather than just thinking of pedaling down, or pressing down on the pedal, think about pedaling like this, and it's way more effective, way more efficient. It's going to apply more power to the bike, and that can help you also in pedaling uphill, or in any situation pedaling on your bicycle. That's one thing to keep in mind when you're riding your bike. Something else I wanted to talk about that actually is, at first you're going to be like, what does this have to do with anything, is an engine, an RPM, and an automatic versus a manual transmission. I myself and my wife, we prefer a manual transmission. I have a Chevy Avalanche, and that's an automatic. I would prefer if it had a standard, but I don't think any Chevy Avalanches came with a standard transmission that I know of. I have a Jeep Wrangler, and that's got a standard in it. And that's why I actually love riding motorcycle, because it's the interaction between you and the machine, and you have more control over that with a manual transmission. of what gear you want to be in under given circumstances. Where with an automatic, you don't have a choice. The computer and whatever else decides that. Yeah, you can shift a automatic transmission manually, and you should at times. The benefit with a standard or manual transmission in the same sense is when you're going uphill or you're coming downhill, you can shift into a gear and keep it there. But the problem comes in where some people don't understand really how a motorcycle or a manual or standard shifted vehicle works, and they'll get into a gear and they'll start letting it lug down, and you'll feel the car lurching and stuff because their RPM isn't high enough. They're not in their proper power band of the vehicle. Now here I made like a little mock tachometer, and you can kind of look at this tachometer, and when the vehicle or motorcycle or car is just shut off, it's at 0. And when you start it up, it usually revs up a little bit, and then it'll settle down to wherever its idle point is, and that's where it settles. And then as you start letting the clutch out, you start accelerating, the RPM goes up, and you'll get to a point where the vehicle's moving, but it doesn't have a lot of power there. And then you'll get into a point that, like in here, this is like your power band. This is where the engine is working most effectively, most efficiently, as far as putting power to the rest of the drivetrain and the gear that you're in. So if you stay in this gear too long and you're revving it up, or you're accelerating too quickly and you don't shift in time with a manual transmission to get up here, and then at a certain point your power drops off, and you can stay in there trying to milk it for as far as you can, but you're not getting any more momentum or power out of it. You need to shift up into another gear, and when you shift up into another gear, of course the RPM drops down, you build it back up, and then you shift again, it drops down, you build it back up. If you shift too late and let it go way up into here, close to red line or into red line, it's very hard on the motor, and you could break something or blow your motor up. The same, I should say engine, because like a drill with an armature and everything, something has an armature in it, that's a motor actually technically, and an engine is like a gas power or diesel powered. It's just basically an air pump. So getting back to this engine band thinking here, it's something I've noticed with people sometimes when they're driving a standard vehicle and they're going up a hill. What they'll do is they're going up the hill, they'll be in like maybe overdrive or 5th gear or maybe 4th gear depending, and then they're in their power band and they're going up, but as they continue going, their RPM starts dropping, and it keeps dropping and it keeps dropping, and then they get to the point where it's going too low, where the vehicle, the engine is putting out so little power, your momentum is slowing down more, and they try to milk that as long as they can, and then they shift. And then what happens is when you shift down from like 5th to 4th or 4th to 3rd, your RPM will go up a little bit, maybe 500 RPM, 700 RPM or something, depending on the vehicle and the machine, but it'll go up. But if it doesn't go up that far, if they let their RPM drop too much, it doesn't go up far enough to really get them into the power band. So generally it'll come up a little bit and they'll try to go, and but they just don't have enough power. So then they got to downshift again, and then that'll finally, they'll push the clutch in, the RPM will drop, they let the clutch back out, engage it, and the RPM will finally climb into a power band of the engine for that gear, where now they can accelerate, and they'll start going wah, and then they'll upshift wah, and then they'll drop down here and wah. Sorry for the noises, but that's what they do, and it's ineffective, it's inefficient way to drive a manual vehicle. So what you need to do with a standard, if you're going up a hill, is you're in your power band, and maybe you're in 5th gear, and as your RPM starts dropping like this, and it gets down to a point, don't let it get too low. Keep an eye on your tachometer, listen to the motor. With a motorcycle, you can feel it pretty easily also. And then when the RPM gets around to a certain degree, and you're still in your power band, but getting a little lower in it, you downshift, and then it puts you right back up here into that sweet spot of your power band. And then you only had to downshift once, in general, you can keep motoring right up that hill and get over the top. Or if you have to downshift again, well, you still do it near the lower part of your power band. Don't let it drop way down in here. So what does that have to do with a bicycle? Bicycle is the same. If it's more than one gear, then you're dealing with the same effect. Engine RPM. Your body is the engine. So what is your RPM? It's your pedal cadence, right? How many revolutions per second you're pedaling the bicycle crank. So if you start hitting a headwind or you're going uphill and it's a long climb and it's just a steady grind, what some people will do is they're in this sweet spot pedaling along. All of a sudden they come around a corner and they hit the headwind and their RPM starts going down, the speed that they can pedal the crank. And or they hit a hill and the same thing, it starts dropping. And the issue is if you let yourself get too slow and it drops down here, your engine kind of starts lugging. You start pedaling and you'll notice when it comes around the top, you like hit this slack period and it goes clunk, 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 and it's just harder. And people that are pedaling like that, sometimes you'll see them start really weaving, trying to get up the hill, and it makes it even harder because you're increasing your distance that you have to pedal. It's just torturous. So you hit a headwind, you're going uphill, you get to this point, going up the hill, you're in your sweet spot as you start pedaling up the hill, and your speed starts slowing down, and before it gets too low, drop a gear. Boom. Your pedaling cadence will pick back up. So you don't want it to vary too much. You know, if you're someone who likes to cycle around the 90 revolution per minute cadence or a certain wattage, if you have a power meter on your bicycle, if you notice that starting to drop out of a certain range, downshift, and that'll kick it back up. And you're going to be more effective and efficient at pedaling at that rate. If you let it get down too low, what happens is you're going to drop a gear and it's going to come up and you only pedal a short distance in that gear and you're going to have to drop another gear to try to get back into the power band. And if you don't have another gear, usually what happens is the person will either start weaving like this, really, serpentine back and forth, and I've seen people doing that before, or they end up getting off their bicycle and have to walk it. So the issue with that is if you're climbing hills or you're in a place that's windy a lot and you're fighting headwinds all the time and you're in your lowest gear and you can't stay in this power range and you keep her dropping down here but you don't have another gear to drop down into, then you need to re-gear the sprockets on your bicycle. If you don't have the tools to do that or the knowledge, I'd take it to a reputable bicycle mechanic and ask around your friends if they're cyclists, and they'll help you out and you can get that geared properly, and that's going to improve your ability to cycle up that hill. And Veg Pedaler probably knows this and other people, but some people don't. A lot of people don't understand how engine RPM and gear selection and terrain and weather conditions affect what gear you need to be in, and it's no different with a bicycle. In this video I was going to show you a couple other strength exercises, but since my neighbors are kind of making a lot of noise and stuff out there, I figured I'd try filming this in my little bitty my little bitty living room. Hopefully it'll turn out okay. But so rather than share another couple ideas on training the strength of your upper body to cope and be able to leverage your strength into your pedaling more, we'll talk about that more in the video after this one. And so what I want to address in this video, other than the two subjects we talked about, is scraping the mud off your feet, so to speak, as you're pedaling, and having the proper cycling of the crank and thinking about how to apply that effectively. The other issue is selecting the right gear for the speed and not waiting too long to select that gear. Don't wait till the last second and drop a gear because it's just going to be too hard. And if you do that, that's why you're cranking so hard and it's hard to get up a hill. Either that or you need to re-gear your bicycle. So what I want to look at is more sport-specific training as far as riding your bicycle. I'm going to grab a little something from a different sport and I'm going to apply it to bicycling. So let's take a look at sprinters for a second. Now, one way sprinters will train is they'll run hills. They'll run up hills. A lot of football players did that, like Walter Payton, and it proved their ability to sprint. Some people think football players don't sprint that well. Well, I could care less what people think about that because I played a lot of football when I was younger, and the issue is when you're, someone who's sprinting on a track in a straight line, for a 40-yard dash or 100 meters or 1,500 meters, what are you worried about? Nothing but sprinting straight ahead. If you've got the ball in your hand or you're trying to tackle someone and you're sprinting, you've got all these other factors you're dealing with, okay? Plus you've got equipment that weighs you down, protective equipment, or if you got the football, you're hanging on to it, you got to worry about that you don't get stripped. Then you're trying to duck and dodge and slam people and buck, So their ability to sprint is going to be a little different. They have way more skill involved that they have to learn to sprint through all of that versus someone who just is focused on sprinting on a track straight ahead. So if you're a sprinter and you think you're superior in some sense, or you teach sprinters and you think football players can't sprint, you're comparing apples to oranges, dude. So anyway, I just thought I'd cover that here in this video. Another thing about sprinters is using hills strengthens your body. It's like changing the gear that you have. You can run at different speeds, so to speak, and change your gearing. You can do running starts when you're sprinting. So you sprint maybe the first 10 yards and gradually increase your speed, and then once you pass the 10-yard line, the next 20 or 30 yards or whatever, you accelerate hard from there. It's called a flying start, basically. And different cadences or RPMs basically that you have, or footfalls or foot strikes or whatever, the person's basically changing their gearing within themselves. Now, sprinting up a hill changes your gearing. Dragging a sled of some sort changes your gearing, or like a parachute or some sort of drag effect. Wearing some type of weight equipment like a weight vest changes your gearing. So the incline of the hill can change a sprinter's gearing in that aspect. Now, sprinters will use the hill training to improve their flat sprinting because there's more resistance running up a hill than on flat level ground. So how can that benefit a cyclist? Well, most cyclists might think when they're training a hill, what they'll do is they'll cycle up the hill, and that's their training for getting that hill under their belt, so to speak, and getting better at it. But is that what a sprinter does? Does he pick the longest hill he can and then he sprints up that hill all the way, thinking that's going to improve his sprinting ability? No, it's not what he does. What he'll do is he'll do interval training basically on that. He'll sprint up the hill, he'll walk down, he'll take a breather for a little bit, maybe several minutes, and catch his breath because it's like a form of strength training. And then he'll sprint up again and he'll come down and he'll do a certain amount of sets doing that. So you can apply the same principle to cycling up a hill. So what you do is take a hill that's fairly close to where you live or where you ride, and then rather than trying to cycle up the whole thing and force yourself and endure through the whole thing, if you want to improve your strength and being able to lock your handlebars in better when you're cranking hard and you're seated on your bike, you're trying to wedge yourself between the handlebar and apply power to the pedals and all of that stuff going on, what you do is select a gear, maybe one up from an easy gear that gets you up the hill. Select a gear that's just harder than that, just one up, and pedal. And then only pedal for a certain distance, or a certain amount of seconds, 30 seconds or something, and pedal harder than normal. And you're not going to be able to keep that up for very long because it's like a sprint. You're using more energy. You're using more anaerobic power, the muscles of your legs, versus your heart and lungs so much. So what you do is you'd kind of sprint up there a little bit, not a full sprint, but you'd kind of like maybe a 70 to 80% effort and crank up that hill, but it's way harder, it's harder than normal in your easier gears. And then go up there and then turn around, coast back down, get off your bike, shake your body out, shake your legs out, get some feeling back in there, catch your breath, get your heart rate back down, and then do it again. And do several series of those, and you're going to want to get your heart rate calmed back down to a reasonable level for whatever kind of shape you're in. And that's how you can use hills and very sport-specific training for cycling to improve your ability to cycle up the hill, because this is going to give you sport-specific training in holding the handlebar and cranking harder. Even if you don't sprint hills, you don't compete, If you do this like once a week and practice that and get better at that, I can almost guarantee you if you do that for about 6 weeks, go up a hill now, pick a hill that you is kind of challenging for you and put it in a gear and get in your easier gears and pedal it and see how long it takes you and how you feel and everything, and time yourself, and maybe check your pulse rate if you want or whatever. And then for the next 6 weeks, once a week, do your suitcase deadlifts and suitcase farmer walks or the combination, and then do some of these hill sprints once a week on a different day from your suitcase deadlift, weightlifting type stuff. Pick a different day and then do hill sprints repeats on your bicycle. Stay seated and crank, get in harder gear. Make sure your seat's up high enough because you don't want your leg to bend too much at the top or bottom of your stroke because it's hard on your knees. So you want a nice long stroke at the bottom of your crank. And if you don't know how to set that up, find someone who will help you set that up properly, because that'll make a difference too. You'll have more power in your pedaling. And do that, And then after 6 weeks to 8 weeks, go back and tackle that hill again. And I can almost guarantee you're going to pedal up that hill faster and more effectively and more efficiently without killing yourself quite as bad as maybe it was before. After you do those hill sprints for a period of time, you might be able to shift up maybe 2 gears or 3 gears higher than you would normally use. So if that's the case, if normally, the sprockets on your bike and stuff, whichever one you're using, say you're using the bottom one, like your easiest one to get up that hill. Well, after several months of doing those hill sprints, maybe at level the next sprocket up or 2 sprockets up, say you get to 2 sprockets up and you're doing sprints, or maybe even 3 sprockets up from that bottom one. Now what happens is you'll probably be able to start climbing that hill in the second sprocket up. Well, 1 sprocket up, the pedal's a little harder, means you're going faster. So you're going to get up that hill quicker, even if you're just grinding at a constant speed and you're not sprinting. So as a sprinter, or even a medium distance or long distance runner, can benefit from hill climbs and interval training and sprint training. The same is true with a cyclist. Even if he's doing more long distance, like 100-mile rides and stuff like that, or he's just riding recreationally, but he's got some hills or headwinds that are tough for him, by incorporating some of the sprint training in that sense once a week and building that up, you're going to get better in this other aspect. So maybe some people haven't thought about this. They haven't thought about, maybe how one sport can apply something, and the principle shifts right over. And you can take that same thought process and apply it to your cycling. So that would be my suggestion. Do the suitcase deadlifts, farmer walk deadlifts, maybe once or twice a week, and don't kill yourself with it. Just try to get stronger. Let your strength build up with that gradually. Don't tweak anything. Stay squared up. And then once a week, do those hill climbs on your bike. I pretty much can guarantee you're going to start getting better at those long, slow grinds up the hill, because your upper body strength from sprinting, you're going to use more of it than a long, slow grind. So you're going to develop some more strength. You're going to take your suitcase lifts strength, and it's going to start melding over into your cycling strength on your sprints, which will then meld into your long, slow grinding up a hill. You shouldn't be grinding anyways too much, because if your RPM is dropping too low, you got to drop down another gear. You're wasting too much energy and you're making it too hard on yourself. So that's a thought process. So the other issue that I need to address really quick with that gearing type thing is, if you're already pedaling up a hill and you're in a gear, one of your lower gears, and you can pedal up the hill in that gear, and you can maintain a good pedal cadence, 60 to maybe 90 revolutions per minute of pedaling, and you can do that, but the issue comes in where at some point at that pedal cadence, your forward momentum is so slow that it becomes difficult to balance your bicycle. And so that is the other reason sometimes people will start weaving back and forth, more and more on their bicycle, because it's hard to balance because they're not going very fast. And they're pedaling 60, maybe 90, revolutions per minute. So if they bump it up another gear, in order to maintain that same cadence or 60 to 90 revolutions per minute of pedal strokes, uh, it takes more strength, and it's also going to take some endurance to do that up that hill. If they can maintain that cadence, they'll be able to go faster. The bike will balance better, and they won't be weaving back and forth so much. That's the gear that they need to be in. They need to get the strength to be in that gear or maybe one gear higher. And if they can't do that, when they bump up a gear and they can't maintain that pedal cadence and they slow down to like 40 or 50 revolutions per minute, that's when that bike's starting to slow down so much they're weaving back and forth a lot too. So that tells me that if that's the situation, that person needs to develop more strength in their body and ability to put that strength out over a period of time. And this is where those hill sprints on their bicycle can help them develop that strength and that capability. So you'd want to do like maybe 5 repetitions of that. Sprint up that hill a short distance, come back down, take several minutes, catch your breath, get your heart rate back down, sprint up the hill again, and do that like maybe 5 times and build it up to maybe 10 times. You'll have to experiment with it and see what works best for you and what you can recover from, and do that once a week. Uh, in some cases, for some people, it might work better to do it twice a week and maybe not do the suitcase deadlifts and the suitcase farmer walks. I don't know, unless I'm working with a person individual and can see what they need and how they're developing from that. It's hard to say, but these are things that I would look at personally in handling that situation to begin with. So hopefully this helps some people. Veg Pedaler and Spider Legs and probably others already know these things and maybe have used them before. I don't know. But I'm sure there's probably a lot of people that don't know about these things, or maybe haven't thought about using hill sprint interval training like a runner does. You could do the same thing with your cycling and it can improve your cycling. You just don't want to overdo it. Anyway, this is Walter, and next week I'm going to get back into showing you a couple strength exercises. We'll talk about some more things, and probably I'm going to share something about motorcycles that a lot of people just don't know, and it has to do with police officers and motorcycles. I will see you next week, and have an awesome day.